All right, I think we're good to begin. I hope most of you have settled down now. And well, first of all, thank you for coming in. And we're actually quite excited about bringing this new and incredibly exciting technology. And we're finally enabling it in the service provider domain. For now, yes, I know there is a lot of anticipation as well for the customer appreciation event later tonight. And I've been told it's actually going to be pretty much of a belter. So I won't take too much of a time, except for the fact that we'll ensure that you hold on to your seats for the next 90 minutes as I try and introduce you to the whole concept of autonomic networking in terms of how it works underneath, under the hood, and how we can actually enable this in the service provider domain. Now, there are a lot of aspects that I would like to cover throughout this presentation. And one of the key goals, of course, is to try and get feedback eventually from all of you and eventually from all the people that you can talk to and represent this technology in front of. So we will have a lot of feedback questions that we'll deal with. But before all of that, quick introduction. I'm Akshat Sharma. I'm the technical marketing engineer responsible for autonomic networking at the NOS TG Group in Cisco. And I'm accompanied today by Amit Datta. He's the question manager for the day, and he's also the product manager. So any of your questions related to roadmap clarifications and feature requests, he's your man, right? So let's begin. Meet Marco. He essentially works for SwiftChase Networks, a service provider, and he is a CCIE. So we can pretty much assume that he knows what he's doing. And he's responsible for design, deployment, and operations at SwiftChase. So pretty much he could be either one of you or somebody you work with. And to a large extent, he's been there, done that. He's been involved in operations for a long amount of time. And therefore, when tasks come up to bring up an entire network, it's not something that he hasn't seen before. However, today, he's got a big task at hand. He needs to bring up 50 carrier Ethernet customer sites. And when I refer to customer sites, I'm essentially referring to the devices in the rings. These devices go directly into customer premises, and it's a typical carrier Ethernet topology, one that finally homes into the aggregation boxes. And well, that's not new. Marco's done that before, so probably not much of a challenge. Well, then there's more. He also needs to bring up a complete mobile backhaul island, and that would entail the aggregation boxes, connecting to the cell site routers, which could be connected in any sort of topology, and all of these are connected over a third-party Metro Ethernet cloud. Again, sort of a challenge, but not something that he's not dealt with before. But now come the constraints. He needs to do this within 1 week and at the least cost possible. And when I mention least cost, I'm not specifying a value, but assume that it's going to be highly restrictive. Of course, before I go on, we all know that generically when we have to bring up networks of this size, the constraints are not that restrictive, right? 1 week seems too less. I mean, a quick show of hands, how many of you feel that this seems ridiculously unreasonable in terms of bringing up such a network in only 1 week? So I see a lot of hands. And that's exactly the point. It is unreasonable. But he has to abide by the requirements, right? And that's precisely why this time he's going to look at the entire problem in a completely unconventional manner. One of the things that we've always done is to throw a feature at a problem. I have a security problem in my network. Cisco gives me a security feature to deal with it. I suddenly have deployment hassles in my network. I get a zero-touch deployment feature. What happens as a result? I have a huge amount of baggage that goes with every feature that I need to deploy. They don't work easily together. And one of the main goals of ensuring that the deployment workflow is efficient is to ensure that all the different features can easily leverage some base services. And that's where we'll get to. Or that's where Marco needs to get to. So I don't know how many of you are aware of Michael Stevens. He actually runs this channel on YouTube called Vsauce. And one of the things he often states is that in order to simplify any sort of problem, in order to deconstruct it to its base state, you need to camp out with the subject as long as possible. It's quite an obvious statement, but a very powerful one. When we start considering that the problem at hand is generically of huge proportions in terms of how deployment is handled today and will be later on, Marco needs to do exactly that. He needs to camp out with the subject and eventually deconstruct the entire deployment paradigm. And that's what we want to do today. We're not going to solve this through point features. We need a much more holistic solution. So the idea is to bring up, one, the concept of how we do things today, how we can solve the whole thing in a much more holistic fashion, and how we can leverage that for a whole new set of services and features later in the future. So let's take a look at what we do today. Now, this is a typical deployment methodology. I would urge you to correlate this with what you do in your networks and how you relate to these sort of steps going forward. So, of course, one of the first steps that we normally deal with is the purchasing of the devices, right? We get our devices, and generally, the first step is to send these devices to a pre-staging facility. And in the pre-staging facility, either we're going to put the full configuration on the devices, so they're all ready to go as soon as they're installed, or we'll put in a partial config so that they have connectivity to a central location from where they can get the full configuration, right? And once these fully or partially configured devices go out into the field, they're installed and powered up, and finally, you can do the rest of your tasks. Activate your services, connect the management and customization solutions. And however, there is a problem here. We do pre-staging, which essentially means you're trying to put a configuration on a device, which also means that there is a chance of mistakes happening at that point itself. So when the devices go out either with a full or a partial config out in the field, there is of course a chance for misconfigurations to happen. And when that happens, the only real solution for a remote device sitting somewhere in your entire deployment, for it to come online again, is to actually have a truck roll to handle these misconfigurations. And that's why I've included this in the deployment workflow as well. The fact that you're dependent on pre-staging to give you a config also means that you're dependent on truck rolls to handle the misconfigurations that come as a result of pre-staging. So that's the generic deployment methodology. Okay. Right. So the need is to ask the right questions. If the deployment methodology automatically means that it's going to take me a lot of time to deploy my network, that it's going to cost me a lot simply because I have to have so many truck rolls, then I need to make this entire workflow efficient by eliminating as many tasks as possible. So let's start with the hypothesis that we are going to eliminate certain steps that are not necessary, right? So one of the questions is, can I eliminate pre-staging? And that's a valid question, because if I do that, then of course my devices are now going to go completely bare out into the field. What does that imply? If I don't have pre-staging, how do I ensure security? For one. If I don't have pre-staging, how do I ensure that my devices can be discovered out in the field? Two. If I also want to avoid misconfigurations due to truck rolls, how do I get the reachability to my devices in the first place? I have to send a truck roll just to solve that problem. These are questions that need to be answered, and frankly, these are precisely the questions that have led to the formation of all the types of zero-touch deployment solutions that exist till today. But we're going to solve that. Let's make this statement true for now. Pre-staging is superfluous. We don't need it, it's extra, and we're going to do something completely without pre-staging. So one of the essential steps, of course, as I already mentioned, is the idea of going from purchase to pre-staging and then to installation. So if the task is to completely eliminate pre-staging altogether, our requirement is we go from purchase to installation directly. All right, so that's our first requirement. Let's try and build the hypothesis for that. Enter your zero-touch solutions. You're aware of them. These are the ones that are located centrally, and generally, the methodology for zero-touch solutions is this. You set up your DHCP, DNS, or TFTP servers that are reachable either on layer 2 or through a helper network, and your new device in the field receives a bootstrap config in order to reach a provisioning server. Once it does that, you authenticate it, and finally give it the config and the image necessary. That's how zero-touch deployment solutions work today. And that works fine, especially for an enterprise, right? Because the entire network is within a contained environment. But service providers are a lot more complex. Your entire network is not in a contained environment, and you do expect your devices to be out in the field where you really have no reachability except to send somebody to a site to either configure them or bring them back up again. So there are gaps in zero touch today. One, how does a new device discover the provisioning server, right? You need DHCP DNS servers, as I just indicated, per access site. They're disjoint as well, so you will have to provision these servers per access site just to get to a provisioning server up there in the center location. A bootstrap config is necessary just to be able to ensure that the device gets discovered. There is also a security loophole. If the whole mechanism depends on the fact that a DHCP or DNS server gives the device the IP address of the provisioning server that it needs to reach, then in that case, you're allowing a rogue device onto your network before it is validated. This is a security loophole, and that needs to be addressed as well. So if we really need to make this entire solution complete, what we need is security and discovery without any servers or configuration, right? I think we're getting somewhere. What we're really saying is, if I can combine zero-touch deployment solutions with this concept of security and discovery without servers or configuration, then I can eliminate pre-staging. That's a good step because these are huge savings, both for time and money. And that's precisely why Marco is looking at this, because he needs to solve the problem in as fast time as possible and at as low a cost as possible. So that's the first step. If you remember, another thing that I mentioned was misconfigurations. You have to send truck rolls just because a device goes offline. Now, one of the customers we spoke to earlier stated that while they could probably bring up a device, install it for about $1,000, if it goes offline and I have to send a skilled personnel just to bring it back up again, I have to spend $4,000 just to do that. The OPEX is killing them. And that is a problem. So if, for example, you're at the center location and you end up doing a AAA misconfiguration, forgot to put the password, that happens, right? Well, the remote devices go offline. The only solution? The dreaded truck rolls. So how do you solve this issue? Our requirement is that I need consistent reachability to the devices across these misconfigurations. Let's combine these requirements. First, in order to make zero-touch solutions work, we need security and discovery without any servers or config. That's what I just indicated before this. And now, in order to ensure that I can also handle misconfigurations from a central location, I need consistent reachability across misconfigurations. We're actually getting somewhere. Let's look at how we can consolidate these requirements into a solution space. If security, discovery, and consistent reachability can be ensured in a manner that they are done automatically, without any servers or configuration, and they are valid across misconfigurations, then you're finally talking. Because then you finally have a network that can potentially get rid of pre-staging and truck rolls due to misconfigurations. So that's a good step, right? And therefore, the first requirement is coming up with a base infrastructure. And once you've done that, think about features. Zero-touch deployment solutions. What do they need? I've already mentioned they need security and discovery. All right, they can leverage that from the base infrastructure. Remember, we're all still in a hypothetical space at this point. Marco is trying to figure out a solution to the problem in a hypothetical manner. He doesn't know what the solution is, but he needs to do it in an architecturally sound way, and that's what he's doing now. So yes, zero-touch deployment solutions can leverage security and discovery. What about management and customization solutions? They always give us post-deployment benefits. Until you have connectivity on a device, your management solutions can't connect. So, if I could have reachability without configuration, then that problem is solved as well. So, zero-touch deployment solutions and the management and customization solutions can potentially now act as applications on top of this base infrastructure. Finally, this could be the consolidated solution space that we're looking for. The most efficient workflow would therefore be this. Purchase your devices, install them, power them up, go ahead and activate your services and connect your management solutions. This is how it needs to be, and this is how it should be. This is how Marco could potentially achieve the required target within a week and at the least cost possible. But of course, this is easier said than done. You need this infrastructure, right? Does such an infrastructure exist? Well, now it does. And that's where we introduce the concept of autonomic networking. If you've attended Michael's session on autonomic networking in general, he alludes to this concept every time he needs to bring up the concept of autonomic networking. This is the vision. But the vision is one thing. This is what we work towards. Try and make the network as self-managing as possible. Allow it to be self-configuring, self-protecting, and so on. But we need to take baby steps. The base infrastructure, if something like that can actually be provided because we're working towards this vision, then those are huge benefits. So right, let's keep this as a vision, and let's look at where we've reached by working towards this vision in the first place. So take a look at what we have in autonomic networking today under the hood. The whole concept starts like this. The first device on your network is what we call the registrar. You can think of it as a seed device because he's the one that is going to start propagating the overall concept of bringing up an autonomic network. The registrar is responsible for validating new devices getting onto the network. Remember I mentioned something with respect to zero-touch solutions? Devices can get onto the network and get access to core services even before they are validated. That is a security loophole. We need to plug that. You need security without servers or configuration, and you need that from the get-go. So, the registrar is responsible for validating new devices coming in. Now, a new device comes in, quite aptly named Michael, and he needs to connect to the registrar. We don't want to mandate topology limitations, right? If we end up saying that the device needs to be connected to the registrar at every point, that's not going to fly because our topologies don't work like that. What about a Metro Ethernet cloud? If my discovery can't work across that, I can't bring up my network without bootstrap configs. So we'll work with the assumption that we do need to have a dark layer 2 cloud in the middle, and we do need to work across that. So let's assume that there is a dark layer 2 cloud there. How do you identify the new device? Does it need a bootstrap config? No, it doesn't. It does need a unique identifier. And there are different ways of looking at it. The eventual goal is to use SUDI. And those of you who are aware of what a SUDI is, it's actually the next version of the UDI that we use on devices today. It'll be a secure version of it, and it will be cryptographically tied to the hardware. Therefore, there is no way that you can spoof a SUDI. But still, we've got UDI today, and to a large extent, spoofing that is difficult. So let's assume that that is our best bet for now, and we'll work with that as our main identification mechanism. So, all right, these devices can now start talking to each other. Fundamental requirement, no configuration on the new device. So let's see what he does. The initial device, which is the registrar, is something that we're going to configure. And I'll show you what the config actually is. The idea is to put something called a domain name on the registrar, which starts off the entire process. The domain name is specific to your customer, whatever you want to call your entire network, right? So let's assume SwiftChase is what he's working for. Then swiftchase.com could be a domain name. With that in mind, we go ahead and configure the domain name, unshut the registrar, and you're good to go. The first step, therefore, is to discover the new device. And we do this discovery through channel discovery. That is the protocol we employ. And what this essentially entails is that we can figure out the VLANs that we are allowed to talk on through this dark layer 2 cloud. This is extremely important because this will ensure that third-party Metro Ethernet clouds, for example, don't pose a problem. You can discover your devices across them as long as you have at least one VLAN that you're allowed to use, which is of course true. So channel discovery is step number 1. You get a VLAN ACK and both of you are now ready to talk. Excellent. Next, we go ahead and give the new device a domain certificate. We're taking the next step. The device had a device identity through the UDI, and now we're going to give it a domain identity. This domain identity is given through a domain certificate. You validate the UDI through a whitelist, and I'll talk about that in a bit. And once the UDI is validated by the registrar, he passes on a domain certificate to the new device. And I'll show you this in the demo as well, in which you'll see that the new device gets a certificate, he had no configuration, and all the discovery was done automatically. With that done, we essentially have an initial secure transaction between the devices. You've secured how these devices now are part of the domain. Excellent. Next, we also do something entirely different. Remember the third pillar that I spoke about? Consistent reachability. Discovery is taken care of. Security was just taken care of. But consistent reachability is a problem. If you don't have configuration on a device, how can you reach it? Right? Well, we do something about that. We bring up what is called the autonomic control plane. And this is the crux of the entire concept. Initially, we bring up an IPsec tunnel, and it is software based in order to ensure that it doesn't take up resources, to the device that has just been discovered and validated. And within this IPsec tunnel, we run a routing protocol. The first obvious question is, how do you run a routing protocol without any IP address, right? Well, we give it an IPv6 address. Does anybody assign this IPv6 address? No. This is what we do. Do you see the domain ID that is showing up there? Cisco.com. That's taken as an example. If this was swiftchase.com, we'll use that, whatever you've configured as a domain name on the registrar. We hash that with the device ID that we create automatically, and we use that to finally create a device address. This is therefore unique for every device that will come and become a part of the autonomic domain. So you have an IPv6 address. We have a tunnel set up, and now using this IPv6 address on a loopback, we're going to run a routing protocol. I know that for a lot of people, this would actually raise huge alarms. Think about it. We're suddenly creating IPv6 addresses, and now, in addition to managing the IP addresses that you have been managing for all your configurations, you suddenly have to manage a whole lot that you didn't even decide. Well, you don't have to do that. What we've done is that we've separated this concept completely from your normal data plane configuration. This runs in a VRF, and that's critical. When we say consistent reachability, it needs to be something that is disjoint from how your normal data plane is going to function. If I run it in the global context and I suddenly find that it's using the same channel as my data plane and I do a misconfiguration, it's down. It's not going to give you consistent reachability. So that is a problem, right? And that is why we solve it by running the whole thing in a VRF. And again, we do this automatically. Till this point, not a single config has been put on Michael. Another question. If Michael's now a part of the domain and he's reachable from the registrar because we are running a routing protocol, what happens when Steve wants to join the network? Same question again. Does it need a bootstrap config just so that it can reach the registrar? No. When you set out to do a distributed frame of functioning, then the requirement is that new devices should not be mandated to go back to the same central location that is bootstrapping the first device. Do it in a true distributed manner. And for that purpose, we do what is called the proxy bootstrap. Michael's a part of the domain now. And therefore, when Steve connects, Michael can use the same protocol for discovery. So I could still have a dark layer 2 cloud between them, discover the new device, and then he'll simply proxy its UDI to the registrar. The registrar still validates the new devices, still hands out the domain certificates, but the whole communication is handled by the proxy devices that are already part of the domain. This way, you can finally give it the domain certificate necessary. So if you see, we're building out the whole concept of the autonomic control plane. It's going to trickle down through your topology. That's essential. Now, if new devices need to come in, I don't have to worry about how they're connected and what the topology represents. These devices will build up the autonomic control plane and they will get these certificates. You are effectively building out a network-wide control plane that is disjoint from the data plane, provides consistent reachability, is secure by default because there are IPsec tunnels there, and the discovery is already automated. So if you see where I'm going, we're actually getting closer to the base infrastructure that Marco thought up in the first place. We can do more though. It's not just reachability. If you can guarantee that I can reach any device over this autonomic control plane as long as it is validated, then I also have this concept of the virtual out-of-band channel. I mentioned consistent reachability. And we're going to use that. Think of it this way. The misconfigurations I spoke about earlier, let's suppose that Michael is the subject of it. He goes off. AAA misconfiguration, I can't reach it. But now, I am running the autonomic control plane. So, now when I connect to the autonomic control plane from an outside device, and I'll show you how we do that, it's still secure. Then, I can reach from any other device in the autonomic domain to the device that's gone off and correct the misconfiguration. That's critical. This is how you can potentially completely eliminate truck rolls. If I have reachability to devices despite misconfigurations, I'm saving huge amounts of money. Yeah.
How do you authenticate?
How do you authenticate the laptop?
Yeah.
So what we do today is that we connect the laptop to the autonomic control plane manually. That you put an autonomic connect command on the interface, which puts the particular interface in the VRF, and then you connect the device to it. Later on, however, as this progresses, what you will see is, in the same way that the network devices authenticate each other, servers and peripherals will use domain certificates to authenticate themselves as well. And therefore, the whole concept is going to expand outwards towards these peripheral devices as well. And that will ensure that you can only get into the device by SSHing into it from outside, a secure shell, and we do that today as well, right? So if you put an autonomic connect command on the interface on which the laptop is connected, then only a validated user can actually connect.
So the laptop guy has a certificate on there and uses that.
That's one way of doing it. Or if you have a AAA server to authenticate the laptop, then a user password would be required to be able to enter it. And that's how we'll set it up for now. So as we go into the realm of having certificates at the peripheral devices, we won't need these username passwords anymore. But of course, for now, we do use these username passwords, nothing on the devices, but still at the AAA server to ensure that these devices can be, the peripheral devices can be authenticated before they get into the overall autonomic control plane. And how do I actually learn these services in the first place? I just mentioned that I'm going to connect a laptop to the autonomic control plane, but I need to authenticate it. So I need a AAA server, right? And how do you normally deal with AAA servers? You have to configure the entire Radius configuration on a device just so that new users can be authenticated. Poof. That throws away the entire no requirement for configuration principle, right? Not really. What we end up doing now is we leverage the autonomic control plane to do service discovery. You've heard of MDNS, I would presume. If you've not, it's a simple discovery mechanism that allows peripheral devices like servers to advertise themselves in terms of how we can reach them and probably the ports that they're operating on. We take that advertisement for example, a AAA server connected to a device, and we use the autonomic control plane, assuming that because the server is connected in the VRF, it is allowed to be distributed. We go ahead and then distribute the entire service to the devices. This becomes very useful because finally what we're doing is we've provided reachability, but we're adding more to it. Core services can now be discovered automatically, and therefore you can bring up your entire network, data plane configs included, without any configs. How am I making that jump? I'll tell you how. Let's look at where we've reached with all of the concepts that I just discussed. Remember the base infrastructure Marco thought up? Let's look at security. We do SUDI UDI validation. That's the first step. Devices are validated before they get onto the network. We do domain certificates, ensuring that we create a trusted environment in which these devices can talk to each other over the autonomic control plane. We also, of course, run the autonomic control plane using IPsec tunnels, thereby ensuring that the data is encrypted. We've created this virtual out-of-band channel that is completely secure and is brought up in a secure fashion. That also means that we've essentially taken care of security without any servers or configuration. I didn't connect a server anywhere. Discovery, channel discovery, that was the first step. Devices were discovered across dark layer 2 clouds. So that certainly solves one problem. But we added something more to it. Servers can be discovered. AAA servers, TFTP servers, script servers connected to the VRF. That is what service discovery takes care of. And finally, you have the consistent reachability pillar. The autonomic control plane, it runs a routing protocol. The loopback addresses are available within the VRF. The devices are therefore reachable. And I mentioned that all of these are completely disjoint from the data plane. This ensures that data plane misconfigurations do not affect the autonomic control plane. That is why it is a virtual out-of-band channel. And I do mention virtual because it's still in-band. I mean, we're not creating an out-of-band channel. But by ensuring that it is separate from the data plane, we ensure consistent reachability. Misconfigurations are no longer a problem. So finally, the base infrastructure that we really need to solve the problem that we started off with is complete. And we call it the autonomic networking infrastructure. This is probably the missing piece of the puzzle. And now it's time to get cracking. Because if you now have the base infrastructure that ensures that you don't need configuration, that you do not need to set up multiple features just to bring the network up, you can start deploying your network immediately. No pre-staging required. and you're eliminating the need for misconfiguration truck rolls. Cost reduces. So, the baseline release. This is a primer so that you know exactly when to expect all of this. The release that we are referring to is iOS XE 3.13. That is when every component will be completely ready, and the demo that I'm going to show you will actually be available on the platforms, the 901, 903, ME3600, 3800, and the 901S. All of these devices will support it in iOS XE 3.13. And of course, as you go through this presentation, what you'll also notice is that there are certain slides I do not represent here because they are what you can expect in the future. There is a lot happening in this field, and I have included that for your reference. So do take a look at it. What you'll also notice is how we solve a real-world customer use case that we received from a customer using the autonomic control plane and applications. And I have notified that in a slide later. And of course, whenever you see him looking through the binoculars, that's planned for future releases, right? Come back to us if you want that immediately, and we'll try and prioritize that. Yeah? All right. So let's begin. What do you need? I have to bring up the mobile backhaul island. That's my first requirement. I could have started with the carrier Ethernet topology, but let's start with the tougher one, right? There's a third-party Metro Ethernet cloud in the middle. So what's critical? We need a certificate authority. That is critical. How is this certificate authority going to be useful? Well, till now I've only mentioned that the registrar needs to be configured such that it validates new devices coming in. And it hands out the domain certificates. So who is the trust anchor? You can't just create domain certificates out of thin air. Well, the trust anchor will be the certificate authority. And we set up this certificate authority in our NOC. One of the key pieces of information that you have to notice here is that the entire control plane is IPv6. It does not mandate that your operations become IPv6. Your data plane config could be IPv4, v6, layer 2, layer 3, it doesn't matter. All of this is in a VRF completely disjoint from the data plane, so you're good. Nothing changes. You deploy the network in the same way that you did, except that you utilize the services that autonomic networking infrastructure offers. And one of the key pieces of information here is that the certificate authority need not be IPv6. You just need to validate the devices coming in, right? And this is not the one providing services to the devices directly. It's only validating and ensuring that you can hand out certificates to the registrar. So what you'll do is set up a certificate authority in a central location and connect that to the registrar. Whether it's IPv4, IPv6, doesn't matter. Once you've done that, then think of deployment-centric servers and applications. I need to bring up my entire service, right? I need to bring up the configurations. So I need a zero-touch deployment server. And this could be anything. Whether it's Cisco, whether it's third party, whether it's open source, it doesn't matter. The idea is you need something that will house your configs and is reachable. So we'll talk about the zero-touch deployment server in a bit. In addition to that, some cool things to have would be a DNS server. What we do end up generating, of course, are IPv6 addresses by hashing out the domain and device name. One of the things that we are working on, future releases, will be that we automatically update a DNS server that is reachable with the IPv6 addresses that have been generated so that you can SSH into the devices without really having to figure out what the IPv6 address is. It's all about simplifying how you deal with the network, right? And yeah, so we're going to do that. And the AAA server. So I did mention that if a device goes down, you can use any other device to be able to SSH into your affected device. And how do you do that? Set up a AAA server with the authenticated users and passwords. And once you've done that, use that information to authenticate anybody trying to get into the autonomic control plane. If they're not authenticated, they cannot get in. So when we start off with the principle of security from the get-go, we need to maintain it right till the end and for as long as the autonomic control plane is up. So deployment-centric applications are done. Can we do more? Yes, we can. NMS applications. Prime, for example. We're working with the Prime folks to be able to integrate it into the overall infrastructure. You will probably also see that the registrar functionality might move out of the network device and get virtualized within Prime, for example. SDN controllers are coming in, so don't leave that out. And they will actually be one of the key drivers of the management solutions. You will see a host of new applications that will leverage the autonomic networking infrastructure, and I'll give you an example of that as we go along. Topology applications. These are applications that will show you exactly how the autonomic control plane comes up, and that's necessary because you've not put any config on the devices. You have no idea how they're actually coming up initially. All of this information can be shown in the app to indicate exactly where to locate these devices in the autonomic context. Topology apps will be useful. There will be a lot of other stuff coming in. I do not want to go into intent interpreter. If you were in Michael's session, for example, he would have mentioned intent. It's something that will come in the future, so do expect that, but leave it out for now. We'll concentrate on bringing up the network that Marco set out to do, right? So you will build powerful applications once these things get integrated. What we're only concerned about for now are the critical aspects and the deployment-centric aspects. The CA server. There are two options here, and may I say this outright, the external CA is the only recommended option. Why? Because as I'll show you in a bit, there is something called the concept of redundant registrars. Again, we'll do a lot of things automatically, so it's not going to be a hassle, but what you will find is that if you end up making one device in your network, an iOS CA, as the trust anchor, then you, of course, can't have redundant registrars because that's the trust anchor. No one else can be. Therefore, we allow an external CA to be the trust anchor and have multiple registrars act as registration authorities, hooking up to the same CA. Therefore, the recommended alternative is have an external CA, as I just mentioned, IPv4 or IPv6 in the central location. All right? The deployment server, zero-touch deployment server. I mentioned there are different options for this. One thing that you will immediately see in 3.13 is normal TFTP server integration. Have an open source version, have anything that can allow TFTP downloads, as long as it is discoverable through service discovery, as I mentioned earlier. Then it has to be IPv6 capable though, so let me point that out immediately. Now we're going into the realm of services that need to be reached after the autonomic control plane is up. And therefore they need to be IPv6 capable. So the TFTP server, and later, as you will see, the Cisco plug and play solution as it comes into the service provider space will all be IPv6 capable. Again, that's a future release, so expect that, but with PNP you will find that we'll have a much more cohesive solution that will be the standard going forward. With TFTP servers, you can do it today. Of course, it's open source. Support model, well, you are the support. And yes, there are certain restrictions in terms of what you can do with workflows. But you know what? It still automates the entire process. So TFTP servers, normal open source versions are an option. So we are done with the zero-touch deployment server requirement, and we're done with the external CA requirement, right? Those are the critical things that you set up first. What is our typical deployment workflow? We've got to the situation where we know what autonomic networking can do, and we have set up the management side of things. Now we're finally going to help bring up the network. First step, the whitelist. I mentioned this in passing earlier. This is actually the most important part when it comes to validating devices from the get-go. What you end up doing is create a whitelist, which is a text file of all the UDIs of the devices that are allowed in the domain at that point in time. Two ways of handling this. If I purchase new devices, Cisco gives you a new whitelist from the bill of sale. That process is automated. However, if you need to transition your existing network into an autonomic capable network, then you have to update the whitelist with the UDIs for your existing devices. That's how it is. And once you've done that, go ahead and put the whitelist in a flash, in a disk on your registrar, the device that is going to validate other devices coming in. And I'll show you in the demo how that works out. So what's the config necessary? This is finally where we're getting into the crux of how things work. Configure the autonomic registrar. This is the guy who's going to validate the new devices coming in. Configure the domain ID. Any domain name will do, something that is custom for your customer, and that's what you should be looking at. After you've done that, there are two things that I've marked as optional, but I have already mentioned this. The whitelist, yes, it can be made optional. I'll probably go over it by the end. The same concept is in the presentation. Do have a look at it, but as of right now, I'll say the recommended way of doing this is have a whitelist to validate devices. There is another option to it. We're not really ruling that out, but let's concentrate on the whitelist for a while. And then, of course, the external CA URL. Again, the recommended way of doing things. Don't want an iOS CA because you want redundant registrars. So configure the external CA URL. And again, this could be IPv4, IPv6, doesn't matter. Should be reachable. And then finally, unshut the registrar. With the two optional aspects there, what you can really notice is that the only mandatory configuration requirement is the domain name. This is what is going to give your entire network an identity. And what we end up doing is, of course, running SCEP between the CA and the registrar to obtain the certificate. As soon as you unshut the registrar on the device that you selected to be the registrar, that device will get bootstrapped as the first device in the autonomic domain. And you will see that in the syslogs. Once that is done, we of course have the concept of redundant registrars. Identical configuration, create a template, choose the devices that you feel should act as redundant registrars and put in the same config on all of them, pointing to the same external CA. Another key point here, remember we're going to set up reachability to all the devices automatically. So you don't need to co-locate them. You don't need to provide reachability between them. Because they'll bring up the autonomic control plane, all of these devices will act as registrars if they're configured to do so and automatically converge to the state required. You will not have to set up reachability or any other configuration on them except for the registrar config. Right. Going forward, we're at the mobile backhaul island space. This was the second task that Marco had to accomplish. And of course, this was the tougher task. Why I say tougher? Because there is a third-party Metro Ethernet cloud in the middle. There's not a single zero-touch deployment solution that can solve this problem today. Because you need a very sophisticated discovery mechanism to be able to figure out what new devices are getting connected across the cloud. And with the iOS XE release 3.13, you should expect that the channel discovery process is sophisticated enough to handle this. What we essentially do is this. We send out probes to figure out the VLAN that is available across the third-party Metro Ethernet cloud. Assume that it is an E-line deployment with a single VLAN to any of the remote sites. So if you look at the NID there at the edge, that NID allows only VLAN 416. We don't have that information beforehand. You need to probe for it. So the registrar, which is the first bootstrap device in the autonomic domain, will probe and figure out that VLAN 416 is available. But a critical aspect here, we need the autonomic control plane to not use the same channel as the data plane. Because if it ends up using that, and you end up shutting down the interface that allows VLAN 416, then the ACP goes down as well. Where's your consistent reachability? So we solve that by using double tagging. We figure out the VLAN that is available across the cloud to the remote site, use that as the outer tag that you can see 416, and go ahead with the available inner VLAN tag that can be used to finally separate the autonomic control plane from the data plane. So you will have the same outer VLAN, but two different channels on which the data plane and the autonomic control plane will work, primarily because of the dual tagged EVCs. Where do we set these EVCs up? On the new devices and on the device that is probing. That way, the registrar can now talk to the new devices downstream. You've solved the problem of the third-party Metro Ethernet cloud. And currently, the service instance, the default inner VLAN that we use is 4094. And what you should expect is that, to a large extent, this should allow complete separation. If it doesn't, it will select the one that is available. So you don't need to worry about that. But this did raise an alarm with a number of customers. And the points were valid. Think about it. There are two problems here. If you start probing for all the possible VLANs that could be available, then potentially it could take you a huge amount of time to figure out all the sites that are reachable. And of course, you can't deterministically say, this is the VLAN that I need. You have to probe. So that's one problem. Can I reduce the amount of time that is required to probe for new devices? And problem two, a lot of customers have, of course, customer VLANs in addition to the VLANs that they use for their own network. And all the customer VLANs may not be used from the beginning. They might not be configured. So who tells the autonomic subsystem that you can't use this VLAN for connecting to the device because I want that for my customer VLAN? Well, nobody, right? That's where you have to inject some sort of information into the network to ensure that you can control the channel discovery within a range. And therefore, we've given this option. You have the full autonomic way of doing it as well. But of course, if you have limitations wherein you have way too many sites for you to wait for that probe to finish, or you have reserved VLANs that you've actually not configured in your network, then we give you an option. This CLI is subject to change. However, expect it in 3.13. This is the way we'll control the VLANs on which the probe starts. You mentioned that all I want is the probes to happen on VLAN 400 to 420. And this is what my third-party Metro Ethernet cloud has given me. And I'll restrict myself to that. You can also mention the inner VLAN that you want to use on either side to ensure that you're separated from the data plane. We're all restricting it to only the registrar. And we're going to propagate this information as the network builds up. So every device then knows that, you know what, I will use only these VLANs. I don't want to mess with possible customer VLANs that I could entrench on. And at the same time, I do not want the time to be too huge just to bootstrap maybe 10, 12 sites. Right? So this is going to be critical, and you will see it in 3.13. And once you've done that, once you've figured out the devices and the channels you need to speak on, you move on to the next step. Bring up the autonomic control plane. There will be an IPsec tunnel set up. You will have the IPv6 addresses, as I stated earlier. And you will find that you will have reachability to these devices automatically. All the green boxes that you see there, none of them have any configuration. The config goes on the registrar. You figure out the channel you need to speak on. You bring up the autonomic control plane, and you have reachability. Or did I mention? It's secure. Yeah.
How does the green box authenticate the registrar?
He doesn't. So the registrar is your trust anchor.
So
and
if the third-party Metro Ethernet cloud is intercepting these packets, then you're screwed.
well, that's precisely why the channel discovery is supposed to take care of the VLAN that you're allowed to use over the Metro Ethernet cloud.
But if they're malicious, it's not secure.
Well, yes. So that's the first step, right? And if you end up spoofing those packets, that's of course a concern. Yeah. So we have to admit that you can't make the entire process secure unless you reach a point where you start validating the devices, right? So if somebody ends up spoofing the first packet itself, well, you have to figure out new ways to do it, and we will. But the idea here is that you're assuming that the third-party Metro Ethernet cloud has given you a VLAN to talk on, and you will utilize that to ensure discovery takes place, as long as you can trust your own provider. And we would want to assume that. Right. With that done, of course, we go ahead with the proxy bootstrap and bootstrap the rest of the network as well. You will finally have the reachability to the devices, the cell-side routers connected to the eNode Bs, and your mobile backhaul island is finally completely up and every device is reachable.
Did I understand correctly that each proxy decapsulates the IPsec tunnel, so it's encrypted, decrypted, encrypted, decrypted.
That's right. Yeah. So we do set up link-to-link IPsec tunnels, right? And that is the key aspect of it. Now, there is of course also discussion going on in terms of using other types of encryption algorithms, and we are working on that as well. So IPsec is the first version of what you will see, and you will see a lot more flexible encryption algorithms in the future. Right, and at this point we're ready to learn services, right? This is the key. We've brought up reachability, but now we need our services to be activated. That's where you go ahead and put the autonomic connect command that I mentioned earlier. On the registrar, the autonomic connect command is effectively putting this particular interface in the VRF that we've created. And by doing that, you are connecting the NOC, your own NOC, with the servers necessary to that particular interface. You're connecting the ACP to the outside world. ACP is the autonomic control plane, if I haven't mentioned that already. You put in an IPv6 address to ensure you have reachability. And all of that is done only on the registrar, for example, in this case, but there is no mandate that you have to do it there. You could potentially connect the NOC to any device in the autonomic domain, and it will still function the same way. So you've done that, and next you start reaping the benefits. You have reachability, and you have a service discovery concept that is built into the entire infrastructure. So this is what you will see on the device. When you do a show autonomic service on a remote device, and that's what I've indicated there, the only service you've learned initially is the registrar. That is the guy that bootstrapped you in the first place, gave you the domain certificate. Figured that out, and none of the other services, which are the default services we support today, have been discovered till now. You've not connected anything. Now, you put in an autonomic connect command on the registrar, and you will find that all of this service information gets distributed, and the whole view suddenly changes. You'll find that these devices have learned the services that were discovered by the registrar. This is key. All your devices out in the field have no config. The only reachability was through the autonomic control plane. You do not want to configure every device with the services necessary to bring it up in terms of services, service activation. You don't want to do that. It's a hassle. So we automate that process through the service discovery concept. We push out services to all the devices in the field. And they are assumed to be secure because you are explicitly connecting them to the autonomic control plane. So your NOC should be the only one that gets connected there. And that's key.
Which mechanism are you using to tell the remote devices?
We are using MDNS, multicast DNS. So we use that over the autonomic control plane and spread out the information. And once that is done, of course, you can go ahead and connect a TFTP server as one of the services, discover them on all the devices. And what we've done is that by default, a device asks for its udi.conf file as the expected configuration file. If it's not there, it doesn't get it. But if it is, and you've set up the TFTP server that way, it goes ahead and downloads the config. So as soon as I put the autonomic connect command, the services should be discovered, and these devices should get the config that you've set up. Notice the key thing here. Everything is now centralized. That is what we mean when we say we want to reduce the OpEx and simplify management. All your configurations are in a single place. You do not require a pre-staging facility. Because you have reachability to all the devices, irrespective of data plane configs and misconfigs, you do not need truck rolls to these remote locations. You've solved the two biggest problems that were actually contributing to the cost and the time required to bring these networks up. we've done that. And then there is, of course, the demo. Yeah.
In the normal management, all my servers, DNS or TFTP are VPN default. So I need to have enough instance for this.
So yes, as I did mention, that you do need IPv6 connectivity to all your services, except the CA server, which can be IPv4. But yes, that is something we have to mandate because the autonomic control plane by default is IPv6. In order to ensure that these devices can talk to services, your services must be IPv6 capable and reachable over IPv6. If you can't set that up, of course, one way to do it is to set up a tunnel that allows IPv6 within an IPv4 tunnel, for example, and then you can get connectivity. But yes, I'm sorry, but that has to be mandated because that is the only way you can build an infrastructure that scales. Yeah? All right, so quick demo. What I've done is, this is actually an all-in-one VM that encapsulates number of different virtual devices which are running the autonomic code. And I'm going to show you how the overall topology comes up. And hopefully, because it's a live demo, so everything will work as expected. But yeah, let's give it a try, right? Sorry for that. If you notice, this is the topology that we're working with. This is how all the virtual devices have been connected to each other. And what we're going to do is that configure the device at the top here with the registrar configuration, connect it to an external CA, and then see how it percolates down to the other devices and bootstraps them. Yeah? All right. So this is an automated lab, and in fact, hopefully once we integrate with Cisco modeling labs, if you've heard of them, we should have these sort of demos available for you to try out, of course licensed, right? But once the integration is done. And that should take a few months, so bear with us for the time being. Now, let's proceed, right? This is where I'll open up the registrar console. And if you notice here, I'm going with the external CA configuration as required. And herein, as I mentioned before, you don't need to be IPv6. That's why I've set up this CA server on IPv4, right? And once that is done, we'll start configuring the registrar. Domain ID. If I may request you to provide me a domain ID, anything of your choice, really.
Okay, live.com.
Sorry?
Live.
Live, all right, live.com. And once that is done, let's configure the external CA. And we'll also configure a whitelist. I'll show you the whitelist in a bit. Right? And then you unshut the registrar. You see the syslog messages coming up. This is where the bootstrap process has started. Check out the syslog that indicates that initially you've received a certificate from the certificate authority. Right? You're communicating with the CA. You get one, the CA certificate, and two, a domain certificate. Because the registrar is also part of the autonomic domain. It's the first device. So it will have a certificate of its own. Where do we store it? NVRAM. Because that's the only way you can ensure that if the device goes down and comes back up again, it still is part of the autonomic domain. It doesn't have to do the same process again and again. So the only real effect that you will see on the config is actually the certificate that will show up. And this indicates that it is now part of a domain. The other devices are now coming up, and if you see here, let me show you the certificates that it has received. You see here, sorry, the syslogs will of course continue because the devices are getting bootstrapped, and you'll notice that you have the subject name associated with the domain ID that you've configured. Certificates are also hashed out in the same way. And of course, you'll have the RA mode certificate because the registrar is now acting as a registration authority and will use the CA as the trust anchor. And yeah, the CA certificate. That's the trust anchor that you've configured through the external CA URL command. With that done, let's take a look at some show commands. Everything is hidden. You're not going to see the VRF in the running config. You're not going to see any of the IPv6 addresses in the running config. But you can view them. We have show commands. So if I do show autonomic neighbors, you see the devices that have been directly connected as neighbors. So let's correlate this. These are the devices that are showing up. 101, 102. Right? There. And also, you can also take a look at the devices as they're getting bootstrapped. This is the command for that. And you'll see that all the devices will slowly get bootstrapped and percolate downwards. Let's take a look at what the effect is on, say, some particular device down the line, right? 304, let's try 303. It may not have been bootstrapped by now, so let's see. It is. This is the command that you'll use on any given device to figure out what information it has gained as a part of the autonomic domain. You of course see the UDI, you see the device ID, which is automatically created, and it is incremental. That ensures that every device, as it gets bootstrapped, will eventually get a router ID that is unique, which will also ensure that the IPv6 address that you see there is unique, because you hash out the device ID and the domain ID to get the IPv6 address. So unique addresses, unique router IDs, and pretty much uniqueness in the autonomic domain. Right, and once I've done that, it's still bootstrapping some of the other devices. You'll notice that 14 devices have been bootstrapped till now. If you notice the topology there, and if you count them, there are actually 15 devices. And one of the things you can now notice, hopefully it's done, is the quarantine command. This particular device was not in the whitelist. I didn't show you the whitelist precisely for that, so that you can realize what the effect is. 307 was never added in the whitelist. If I show you the whitelist now, this is it. It's a text file with the UDIs. It doesn't contain 307, and therefore it never became a part of the autonomic domain. And it was quarantined. So if I were to go to it, there, it's not a part of the autonomic domain. It's not going to get a config. It cannot get onto your network. That's essential. That was the first test in terms of what you can do with airtight, watertight security. Right, with that done, are we done? No. There is of course the show commands that can be looked at, and then there is the service discovery aspect. Now this is something I'm certainly going to hope it works, but what I'm going to do is connect one of the interfaces on the registrar to the NOC, which is where my servers are connected. And I'm going to do that through the IPv6 address and the autonomic connect command that I showcased there, here. And let's see what happens. I did mention that you can check out show autonomic service. All right. So if you notice, there are some logs coming up indicating configured from TFTP something something. Yeah, that's because it downloaded its configuration already. If I check out show autonomic service, it learned services through MDNS, and it downloaded its configuration because I did set them up. It was a udi.conf file. Now let's wait slightly and check out OSPF neighbors. You see what's happening here? The other devices are also downloading their configs because they learned the services as well. I didn't touch them. All I did was touch the registrar. That's it. Services were learned. The other devices learned the services as well. Of course, that's why they got their config and OSPF was started. And now the OSPF neighbors are up. You see how simple that was? Set up the registrar, set up connectivity to the server, and you're done. Your network comes up, configs are downloaded, services are activated, and now you can connect your management solutions. That's why I said 1 week is not unreasonable. All right. So let's get back to where we were. I'll take questions on the demo, of course, so don't worry. but let me just get this done. The carrier Ethernet topology. That was the first task, right? Well, we went ahead with the tougher one, but if you go back to the carrier Ethernet topology, there is no difference. The whole concept is independent of topologies. So however you connect your devices, the entire network will come up. You will get reachability. You will be able to download in exactly the same manner. It doesn't matter. Topology independence is one of the key factors and it is a result of bringing up the entire solution in a holistic manner. Creating link-to-link security, creating channel discovery mechanisms, and so on and so forth. And with this, you're done. Marco is done. It is time for a holiday. You've come up with an entire mobile backhaul island. You've set up 50 carrier Ethernet customer sites through what? Through setting up the registrar with the necessary config that I showed you. Time, 1 week. Cost, minimal. And you can probably correlate that to the costs that you normally face in your network. And of course, further benefits. You have enhanced security. The only way that a device can get a config is through the control plane. Control plane is secure. Your config download is therefore secure. The only way, in order to ensure that you don't have to fiddle with truck rolls or misconfigurations, we have robust connectivity, consistent reachability. And, you have a base infrastructure to build powerful applications. This is actually critical because now you have a whole host of new use cases that you can set up just because you have an infrastructure that is up and running and doesn't go down. You can leverage it. To give you a very small example, and this is probably baby steps, and you'll see this in 313. Where do we go from here? Think of a carrier Ethernet topology, for example. This is an actual customer use case. Their entire management solution is based on EM scripts. They don't use Cisco Prime. They don't use any of the third-party software. They like to have their EM scripts take care of the config for them, take care of all sorts of policies for them. But there's a single pain point. You do have to push separate scripts for each device separately. I mean, come on, EM script download, it's like config download, right? If you can automate config download, you can automate script download. That's what we're doing here. Go ahead and distribute EM scripts. That's actually very powerful. And if you take a look at the presentation and the hidden slides, you will notice where it gets used up. I do not want to go into that because that is still future. And however, it will give you an idea of where we're going with this. There will be a whole host of new applications that you can actually enable through this autonomic control plane, distributed in addition to centralized applications, and you will be able to change the management story pretty much entirely. Actual centralized applications, we have that today. 1PK apps, right? That should be easy enough to do, right? It actually is. And if I go back to the demo, let's take a look here. I'll try the automation lab and I'll launch a 1PK topology app. What it's really going to do is, it's a Java app that's going to connect to the devices. And what I've done is, it's an IPv4 app, just to indicate that, you know what, you can construct things in an IPv4 fashion. The config download happened. That config also included an IPv4 address on an interface. That's where I'm connecting, sorry about that. That's where I'm connecting the 1PK app. So what do? I connect this and put in the username and password that was also downloaded through the config download. And there, it starts building up. What it's really doing is garnering this information from the autonomic control plane. It's going to build this slowly. I can keep refreshing it for a bit, and it will build to a final state wherein it represents what the overall topology is supposed to be. These are the type of applications you should expect once the autonomic control plane is up. Think about it. you bring up the network without any config, you need some feedback. These are the feedbacks that we are referring to. If applications can connect, they can give you more information. And if you consider IPv6 applications, then they can connect without any config download. So potentially, you have an option of connecting management solutions and applications even before you do a config download. We're going into a different realm here. We're now thinking of management solutions that can help in deployment rather than always give you post-deployment benefits. That's the key. And well, that's the future. And yeah, so if you see how it's building up, it's almost going to replicate exactly what it's garnering from the different devices. It's gleaning it from on a device-to-device basis. So yeah, and with that, of course, I am pretty much done. How do you reach out to us? We've got a mailer set up. It's public. Send your queries to autonomicteam@cisco.com. Hound this man for any of your feature requests and clarifications on roadmaps. He'll try and prioritize them. And of course, if you want to see where we're going with the standardization, take a look at the drafts that we already have out in the field. This is not going to be a Cisco proprietary solution. It will be mixed vendor environments eventually, but we need the standardization processes to kick in for that. It's all underway, and you should expect that soon enough in the future. With that done, of course, please do give us feedback about how you felt the session was, whether it helped you out, and get back to us. We're, of course, listening. Any of your queries, we're always willing to help you out. And feature requests, we are completely listening for them, right? So come back to us, how you would want Autonomics to help you in your network and how it can really make your life easier. All right then. Thank you so much.
Plans to add other Cisco devices?
As in?
Are there any plans to add other Cisco devices?
Absolutely. So our current release supports ASR 901, well 313 will, ASR 901, 901S, 903 and ME 3600, 3800 devices. Now these are the, sorry.
Are there any plans to support third-party devices?
Sorry?
Are there any plans to support
Third-party devices. Well, for now, they're not supported because the protocol itself is not standardized, and we're working on that. As soon as that standardization kicks in, we should hopefully expect everything to integrate together. Yeah, and that's precisely why the whole infrastructure was built in a manner that it could potentially be standardized, right? And we're working towards that. And in terms of your question on other devices, we're working on them. The ASR 9K should be sometime at the beginning of next year. I'm sorry, but that's how much time it really takes. And with that, of course, you have other devices coming in as well. Please get back to us in terms of what devices you wanted to be supported on, and we'll try to prioritize them and integrate them in the future.
All typical CE or CD devices would be useful to have.
Of course,
Well,
yes.
We are working on the one case, the ISRG2s, 800s, 819s as well. So once, but they are all in the roadmap. It's not forgotten. It's in the roadmap, and we'll provide it everybody.
I mean, at least it's good to know that there
Yes.
is a plan to add them.
Oh, yes.
Consistency.
And one of the things of just to kind of bring out one of the things is that one of the requirements was to use as less as possible on the system. So the hard percentage we had given for requirement was 2 to 5% of the system resources that EA can use, irrespective of your size of the network.
Yes.
So that's why integrating smaller devices is not that big of a
Right. So yeah, that's actually key because the whole AN process does not use up significant resources on your boxes. 2 to 5% is our mandate, and we try to stick to that. That ensures that your normal devices are not overwhelmed by the whole channel discovery and security aspects of Autonomics. And yeah, they work well for now. Any other questions? Yes.
How did Marco create the config files that were downloaded?
Sorry?
How did Marco create the config files that was downloaded using TFTP?
Right. So remember the pre-staging facility that we completely removed? He got the system that was set up in the pre-staging facility that had the configs and brought it to his NOC. And all he really did was allow that to be discovered. So it would have been done in the pre-staging facility, but now it's done in the actual environment.
Do you like it?
Of course, we do need feedback in terms of how you think it's going to integrate in your environment, right? And what sort of benefits you're really looking for. We've had, sure, tell me.
Yeah, I just want to say that not everybody does the pre-staging that you're saying. So when
Of course.
when you're doing the business case, how much money you're saving your customers, and if you want to charge extra for it, please take into account that these savings are not for everybody.
Oh, yes.
Absolutely.
I've never worked anywhere where they did this kind of pre-staging.
All right, sure.
You give the engineer on site either enough knowledge that he can use a serial terminal to configure 10 lines of stuff so someone else can log into the device,
Correct.
or you give him like a 3G modem that has a serial port, and the engineer in the NOC or wherever can log into the device currently being installed.
So you made the exact point, right? You're not doing pre-staging, but you have a skilled professional who can at least handle the configs to provide a bootstrap config, such that somebody else can get in. That is the cost we're trying to eliminate as well. Because if you really see, misconfigurations are handled in exactly that manner. You send somebody who knows the Cisco CLI and can go ahead and configure something. That's a cost. And pre-staging...
Anyone who knows how to actually interact with this box is skilled enough to do
Of course.
serial command.
Of course.
Otherwise, you don't want him near the box even to replace anything.
And we completely agree. We completely agree, right? But one of the things that we've seen, however, is that a lot of the large service providers, for example, try to use third-party installers, the ones who have no idea of Cisco CLI, and all they're going to do is install, plug in, power up. That's it. And with such installations, especially for countrywide installations, and I'll give you an example of India, right? You have about 60,000 devices that are going out into the field. It's virtually impossible for a company to be able to send out their own personnel and install all of these sites and actually configure something on them just so that you have reachability. It's impossible. They do it through third-party installers who have no knowledge of what's happening. So even if you don't do pre-staging, you still need to avoid the cost of sending skilled personnel to sites. Make it centralized. Focus on building better applications, better management solutions, and leave the entire deployment process to an automated construct. Let it be done automatically. Let it be done in a simple manner that removes your unnecessary costs.
I mean, what you mentioned was that you just drop an email to this installer saying, okay, you need to copy these 10 commands
Sure.
into the initial CLI.
Of course.
Just to bring up the system that it's reachable from the NOC.
Yes.
Must pay install extra for that.
So there are no installers, at least in Sweden, that don't know this.
There are in Norway.
Okay.
We have to take it in a generic manner. So, yeah, I mean, all right. So I think if you have any more questions, we are here, right? You can of course come and meet any of us. We'll be at the booth floor. I don't know, do we have it tomorrow as well?
No, today is the last day. We are there till 5:30, but the whole architects team, AN architecture and marketing team are here. So
Yes.
I'm here in the, as Michael said, the darkest corner of SP. If you just come down, Volvo Solutions, you'll see on the right hand side service provider.
But we are there.
Right at the back, we are there, but
Yeah.
we are there. So just come and see. The demo is also running there continuously.
The same demo, and you will see exactly, if you want to take a look at the code of the tutorial, not autonomics, then yeah, you can see that. So a lot of things to look forward to with this. Please get back to us on the autonomic team at cisco.com. The presentation contains that. If you have any requests, please come back to us. We're all listening. Yeah. Thank you so much.